Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes. We have about 2/3 of our expected attendees. We just wanted to give it a couple more minutes before we get started. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to Innovative's Transitioning Back to the Workplace. We're excited for today's panel. This is a part of our series of webinars that we've been doing specific to COVID-19 and helping provide resources for employers. So welcome today. Next slide, Gene. So my name is Dan Foley. I'm going to be starting the introduction and first part of today's presentation. Also from Innovative today is Ryan Kastner, Vice President of Consulting. He's going to be moderating today's panel. Again, we're very excited about the panel. I'm going to talk about the panelists more here in a moment. We know that we are broadcasting this here in southern New Jersey in the Philadelphia area, and I know a number of us have experienced storms and power outages and internet failures and such. I myself am experiencing that right now, so I'm only going to be on audio today, but the panelists are on video as well. So we certainly hope that this goes off without any technical issues, but if you could just be patient with us. We also have Jamie Bratton, our Director of Communications and Marketing, on as well, just in case any of the panelists or Ryan or myself have any technical issues. So again, welcome, and we're excited for today's panel. So I'm going to take you through just the agenda. I'm going to do a brief introduction about innovative benefit planning for those of you that aren't as familiar with us. I'm going to take you through a few reminders in preparation for today's panel presentation. I'm going to do an introduction of today's panelists, and then the discussions. We're going to be speaking about determining when to reopen for employers, who should return to the workplace, and measures that should be put in place in preparation. Some physical modifications, cleaning procedures, and temperature checks that some employers are considering. Communicating and training your employees under this kind of new world, and things to take away from our new normal. And then we're going to open it up for Q&As. Now, you're going to have an opportunity to ask Q&As. We're asking all questions to be held until the end. If you could just enter your questions on the right panel, we'll be sure to address them at the end of today's presentation. So innovative benefit planning, a little bit about us. So we are a privately owned boutique firm located in Morristown, New Jersey, and we specialize in serving the middle market employers. So from 50 employees up to about 3,000 employees, our largest client. And we support them in 4 specific areas: employee benefits consulting, retirement plan consulting and management, population health management, as well as HR consulting. Our high-end consulting is centered all around the employee experience, so making sure that we're doing the best for our clients and helping them mitigate their costs and provide the best benefit plans at the lowest possible cost while engaging the employees. So everything is centered around the employee. And while we're a privately held firm, we are also a owner partner in United Benefit Advisors, a large national organization with locations in 48 states around the country and 150 offices. So I mentioned a couple of these things earlier. So just a quick few reminders. We're all doing a lot of these Zoom meetings and webinars these days. So we know that there's some things that are important to keep in mind. So if everyone could please remain on mute through the presentation. We will, as I mentioned, answer all questions at the end. feel free to submit any and all questions. We actually had a couple of participants and guests on today's program submit a couple questions prior to the presentation. So any and all are welcome. In your question, please address which panelists you are looking for the question to be answered for. You'll see we have quite a diverse group in our panel, which we're excited about. So please be sure to indicate which panelists you would like to address the question. And then please know the recording is going to be shared after today with everyone that attended. So our panelists today, as I mentioned, we're very excited about our three panelists. Our first panelist that I'm going to introduce is Jerry Stanley. Jerry is the Chief Medical Officer for Population Health Services and Consumer Employer Solutions. Jerry has the executive responsibility for clinical outcomes across the organization, as well as maintaining client-facing strategy for their population's health. Within the population health community, he brings a background focused on clinical innovation, novel and alternative payment models, accountable care, independent physician associations, clinically integrated networks, mergers and acquisitions, and advanced worksite health solutions. We're very excited, obviously, with Jerry's medical background to welcome him to today's panel. Jerry, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate it.
Our second panelist I'm going to introduce is Cora Walker. Cora Walker is the Vice President of Human Resources for Omnicable. Cora has over 20 years of human resources, generalist experience in a variety of industries. She joined Omnicable, a premier redistributor of wire and cable, electrical products, and value-added services as the Vice President of Human Resources in 2018. As a member of the executive leadership team, Cora is responsible for the strategic and day-to-day operations of Omnicable's human resources and process improvement departments. She partners with leaders in the organization to ensure the human capital-focused goals of Omnicable are achieved and employees are connected to the company's mission. Obviously, as the Vice President of Human Resources for this type of employer, Cora is very busy these days. And in conversations with Cora in preparation for today, we know firsthand how busy she is. Cora, welcome. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Dan.
And our final panelist we're equally excited for is Douglas Diaz. Doug is a partner for Archer Greiner, a firm locally here in the South Jersey area, a very large firm that we're fortunate to have a great relationship with. And Doug concentrates his practice in labor and employment law matters where he listens to clients to resolve their issues and disputes consistent with their goals. Mr. Diaz is an experienced litigator who has successfully defended employers in both state and federal courts, as well as before administrative agencies such as the New Jersey Division of Civil Rights, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and the EOC. He routinely defends against a variety of employment-related claims, such as those pertaining to discrimination, retaliation, wrongful discharge, restrictive covenants, and wage and hour issues. Obviously, you can understand why we're excited to have Doug be a part of today's panel with his background and experience. Doug, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Okay. Ryan.
So Jamie. Yeah, sorry, Jamie. Sorry, Ryan and Jamie. I wanted to then introduce Ryan. As I mentioned in the beginning, Ryan's going to be moderating today, and I'm going to be turning it right over to Ryan. Thanks, Ryan.
Sure. Thank you, Dan, and welcome to our panelists and welcome to everybody for joining us. And thank you for joining us today. We're very excited, as Dan mentioned, to have our panelists with us, and they have unique perspectives. So we hope that everybody enjoys it as much as we know we have up to this point and will today. So we're going to dive right in. So first question, we're going to first talk to Doug, but we know that the CDC has provided guidelines on what employers need to consider and what they need to do when they're returning back to the workplace and whatever that may look like. So, Doug, from a legal perspective, what do you think some employers need to consider when they're determining the right time to reopen is?
Well, thanks, Ryan. The first issue primarily is going to be, are you actually ready? Do you need to open? Just practical advice to begin with there. Make sure you have your ducks in a row, so to speak. And you really want to make sure you have policies, and policies. That's going to be maybe a recurring theme of the webinar here today. But don't just open the doors, let people come in and say, hey, happy to have you back here, go to your desk. You're going to want to have Do you have a COVID-19 policy in place? Do you have an infectious disease policy in place? Start with the CDC guidelines and OSHA's guidelines. They have fantastic websites. Frankly, you don't need a lawyer to do these things in that regard. I mean, read the websites, go through it, incorporate those guidelines into your written policies and procedures. Have your written plans in place before you start to reopen. That's the main advice, and I think the most practical advice that you can give. And as we'll see through the rest of this webinar, that'll help you with some legal protections as well.
Sure. Okay, thank you very much. And Dr. Stanley, we'll move it on to you. So what about from a medical standpoint? What factors would you suggest that employers consider?
Really starting off, I'd echo what Doug said. I'm sure you've got your ducks in a row. As I approach this conversation with clients around the country, one of the things I do is approach it from a medical standpoint of understanding why are we reopening. Really, the first question we need to ask is, what's the reason behind why we want to reopen our campuses? There's really no wrong answer. Is it that we want to return to a sense of normalcy? Is it that we've got divisions that are struggling to work remotely? Is it that we need to generate more profit and increase our revenue margins? There's really no wrong answer to why are we reopening. Once you understand why you need to reopen, then we can begin to have conversations about who do we need to come in. If we only have 2 divisions that are struggling, a lot easier to determine we enter in those divisions. And if it's about bringing the entire workforce back, that who begins to determine the next question, which is really the how. And that's that medical piece where we begin to have conversations about temperature testing, questionnaires, lab testing, all of the different questions. CDC has some wonderful guidelines on. And that's the how discussion. And then from there, we back into the when. When I look at the when from a medical standpoint, when we want to reopen, we really want to make sure that we're seeing at least a 2-week decrease in the overall incidence of COVID in our community, so that we can make sure that we're trending down from an overall population.
Hey, Ryan, I think we're having a difficult time hearing Jerry. I didn't know if I got a couple texts from others. I didn't know if it was just me, but I think everyone's maybe having a difficult time hearing him.
Oh, sorry, Jared. You maybe want to try reconfiguring. Maybe we'll kick it over to Cora and then come back to you.
Give me 2 seconds.
Sure. So Cora, if you don't mind, we'll kick it to you in the meantime. So how about from an employer perspective? I mean, I know Dan that spoke about this in the introduction, but obviously OmniCable, we've talked about, has a couple different subsets of employee classifications, if you will. You have your distribution center, which I know you'll talk about. You have more office type employees that are in office settings. So you also have multi-state and multi-location. So what do you think from an HR perspective employers should be considering?
Sure. Well, the good news is we did a bit of a practice session, so I can reiterate a lot of what Dr. Stanley was talking about because it's very much the approach that we took for ourselves. And he starts with the why. Why is it important? You've had people home. We had a really tremendous opportunity to kind of prove to ourselves that work from home really worked. We are not a company that has allowed a lot of flexibility in the past. And we're always a little bit nervous about what do you lose when you don't have people coming into the office. I'll tell you, on March 10th, we literally said to people, get your stuff and go. And then on March 18th, we said, okay, we're serious. You may not return. Get out. So the good news is our folks did extremely well. So when you think about bringing people back into the office, you need to have a compelling reason for why. Part of our reason for asking people to leave was that we wanted to prevent cross-contamination with our distribution centers, right? We didn't want a whole bunch of other people in the office when we have people who are essential to our business who need to be on site working. So part of our why is also being able to answer the question for our employees, well, if you ask us to go home to keep the distribution center employees safe, why is it okay for us to come back now? After that, Dr. Stanley talks about, who comes back, and that's been a big part of our consideration in terms of there are certainly people who will fare better working in the office. Some of our newer employees who would like more guidance, folks who interact with our distribution center on a regular basis, kind of minute by minute throughout the day. And then we have some other support functions that it's not as critical for them to be face-to-face. And so we've started to prioritize not just based upon function, but clearly for us, we're a national company and we operate in Canada as well. It's different in terms of the state guidance in Georgia than it is in Massachusetts. So part of our who also has to do with where are the states at and what's happening in those local markets that make people feel safe or comfortable or still somewhat concerned about returning into work. The how for us really goes into what Doug talked about, policies and expectation setting and acknowledgement that people want to come back and participate as a community that needs to be concerned about the health and safety of everyone every day. It's different than just coming back and sitting at the coffee machine, enjoying the first 15 minutes with a crowd of 6 or 7 people chatting about the weekend. That is not what return to office looks like right now. And so you need the engagement and the commitment of your employees. So you have to define it for them. You have to set those expectations. And I think we'll talk about it, like Doug said, a lot, but those policies and thinking about what that feels like as an employee is critically important. When for us, we are currently targeting, a very slow return and asking people to start thinking about getting back after the July 4th holiday. It will probably take us until September to really have the bulk of our folks back. And I'm not sure that you will ever see a time where 100% of people are in the office 100% of. Sorry, I think my audio just reconnected. Take advantage of creating some flexible work environment opportunities.
Great. Thank you, Cora. And I see you're back, Dr. Stanley. So, I think I got most of what you're saying, but it might sound like it might have been pretty garbled. So if you don't mind just kind of taking us back and revisiting the topic.
Oh, happy to. I think the irony of working for a tech company is having technical difficulties. And I think the only thing that would have been worse is if the doctor would have been late into the meeting, right? So,
no problem.
Echoing everything Doug and Cora said, the conversations I have is really identifying why you want to return to work. And there is no wrong answer for that. And just understanding that once you understand why, whether it's for revenue, normalcy, or, I'd have a lot of places where they're just saying, our X, Y, or Z division can't operate unless they're on site. Once you determine the why, then it's a lot easier to determine the who. The how is where we have a lot of those one-off, very custom discussions where we bring a lot of medical expertise to the table to talk about temperature screening, testing, questionnaires, contract tracing, working through different CDC guidelines, understanding how to set up the protocols so that as I'm working with teams like Cora and Doug, we're really coming up with a very customized approach for each business. And I liken it a lot to early on in the response phase, it felt like a blizzard where all you saw was the snow and the environment was ever changing. Now that we're talking about return to work, it's much more looking at the individual snowflake and really getting that granular to really focus on the individual business unit and its applicability to each location and a lot of places with interstate and in Cora's case, really international work restrictions. Looking at each location medically, I always tell people, make sure that you're seeing a 2-week decrease in the incidence of COVID-19 in your community. We want to make sure that that's trending in a downward trajectory. One, so that we're going to lower our risk for having a bloom or a re-outbreak in our area, but 2, it's going to loosen up some of the healthcare capacity in the area. So God forbid we do have a bloom or we do have an outbreak at one of our facilities, we want to make sure that we're not reopening in an environment with a stressed healthcare infrastructure.
Great points. Okay, thank you all. Appreciate that. So we're going to move on to the second question. And you talked, all of you, in a way at least, about, of course, your employees and how they're going to feel in each of their situations, because obviously everyone has a different situation at home or just in general. So it may not be feasible for all employees to return back to work or to the workplace because maybe things like proximity to high-risk individuals or access to childcare. So how do you determine who should come back to the physical workplace and what measures should be put in place to allow for flexibility? So we're going to start again here with you, Doug.
Sure. Well, initially, echoing what was said before, you want to first ask, who do you really need in the workplace? I mean, that's really the first question to go through. Ideally, you start slowly, as has been said here. You stagger people coming in. But frankly, a lot of workplaces have figured out, I really don't need 100 people in the building. I could do with 10 or 15. We're starting to get the questions of, why do you need me back if things are going fine for the last couple of months? And then that's going to dovetail into maybe the number one question we're getting is, what if they say I don't want to come back? What do you do in that situation? And there's been different responses there. the more prudent course in that situation is you ask the employee, why is it they don't want to come back? What are the concerns? What are the issues? There's been an uptick in reasonable accommodation claims in the last month or so because of the COVID-19 situation. So you got to be careful with a knee-jerk reaction of just saying, well, I told you to come back on Monday. You just said you don't want to be here. You're fired. Some companies have done that, I think, but the better approach is to walk through that with the employee. What are your concerns? What are the issues? Can we somehow resolve them? You want to make yourself at least look good in that process. Now, if the employee is just saying they don't want to come back, so they're just not comfortable, that's not going to be enough, I think, legally to save them at the end of the day. And in New Jersey, Department of Labor has taken that view from unemployment purposes. And then quickly, I have been getting questions about waivers. Can I have the employee sign a waiver to protect the employer? Everybody gets excited with waivers, like the one piece of paper is a cure-all and you wave it in front of the judge, everybody goes home. Doesn't work like that. My view is waivers are a bad idea. Two reasons. One, workers' compensation generally is the exclusive remedy for any claims. If there's a COVID-19 issue and someone says, hey, I got it in your workplace, you made me show up, now I have it, that's really a workers' comp claim issue. And guess what? You can't waive those claims. Guess what? Number two, OSHA requires employers to have a safe workplace. If you're going to make employees sign a waiver, I think OSHA is going to look very negatively upon that. So I would stay away from that as well.
Great. No, I can tell you that especially with our clients, we've gotten a lot of questions and concerns around the legal aspect of it. So I think that's some powerful insights from you, Doug. Thank you very much. Cora, now from an HR perspective, you touched on some of this before, but I know you're creating your plan and starting to implement. So how are you preparing to manage employees and considering your flexibility with them?
Sure, absolutely. Well, like I said, we are traditionally a work in the office type of company, and we have a strong desire for our employees to come back to the office. We like the collaborative nature. We like people being around. And so we are definitely going to communicate and set the tone of, hey, we're really excited to have everyone back. At the same time, we are going to take the opportunity to introduce some flexibility in general, in terms of working from home. We'll have an official policy. We've been back and forth on, do you launch it when we bring people back or do you launch it afterward? And I think the reality, and a lot of what Doug said, was there's a lot of reasons why people may not be able to come back that will be different than sort of normal environment looks like. So we'll probably hold off on our official work from home policy for a while, just so we're not in conflict. And for example, we probably would not, outside of COVID-19 times, say, hey, you can work from home 100% of the time because you have childcare issues, right? That's probably not how a normal work from home policy would work. However, the reality, that's our reality. And so we do allow that. We've been allowing it. It'd be silly for us to not allow it as we work through this transition and until we know what schools and daycares and all those things are going to do. So we're going to take the approach of really setting the expectation. We're excited to get you back. We want you here. If you are unable, or if you are feeling afraid or nervous or anxious about being back, then let's just talk one-on-one about what that looks like. We're a company that looks for opportunities to accommodate whenever we can. If someone brings something to our attention, we like to engage and understand why and how might we make an accommodation. So that's kind of in our DNA anyway. I think our employees expect that. But the reality is we've never had this many people working from home, so we really have no idea what to expect. I have managers who call me every day and say, so-and-so cannot wait. Can I please just let them go into the office? And I have other managers who say, my people are like, please don't make us come back for a while. We're just not ready. So we're going to really focus, like I said, that early July timeframe of starting to welcome and get excited and good reasons as to why we want you back in here. And then we're going to take it slow, and we're really going to have to be thoughtful in terms of, being able to answer the question of why do I need to be in when I'm doing a very good job from home.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you, Cora. I know we have a lot of HR leaders on the call, and I'm sure that everyone has this on their plate, so I'm sure they really appreciate those insights. So thank you. So next, Dr. Stanley, we'll go to you on this question from a medical standpoint. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think as you're looking at who to bring back to work and who to allow to stay working from home, I get to be a lot fuzzier than Doug. This is a hard question for Doug. I get to be more of the teddy bear on this question and give people the doctor's notes. I mean, obviously, there's people that are going to be at higher risk for medical complications. So as we start thinking about people with multiple comorbidities, people over age 65, people that are immunocompromised, and we've done a lot of analysis for some of our clients, looking at their claims, looking at their prescription data and their PBM data to identify and send letters to the clients and they're individually saying, hey, we want to let you know you're at high risk. So as you're having these discussions with your HR team, we want to make you aware of that. But obviously, if you're at risk for having problems and you feel more comfortable being at home, I think that would really be the first group that I would focus on. The next group is really going to be those caring for other people. If somebody calls, like Cora brought up the concept of childcare issues, but what if you're caring for a child who's on immunosuppressant drugs, or you're caring for an elderly parent or in-law or someone that you're providing care for who's at high risk, and you going in and out of the workplace could potentially put them at a higher risk. We want to be very thoughtful about those considerations so that it's not I caught it at work and brought it home in the family, because where we're really seeing the high incidence of contracting COVID-19 is the one person who goes to the community and then brings it home, where it's aggregated in the household. So we want to be very sensitive to that population medically. The other place is really start thinking about we've talked about the physical care, think about the mental aspects. If somebody is feeling extremely stressed and anxious about leaving the safety and the confines of their home in their quarantine, and we're bringing them back into the office, we talk a lot about absenteeism versus presenteeism. If somebody's in the office and they're really not present, is that an effective use of their time if they were present while working remotely? So we don't want to cause situations where we're going to create some post-traumatic stress or some anxiety by reopening people's worlds. And we've got to be very sensitive about those physical care demands versus some of the mental health demands as we're reopening.
Great. All very good points. Thank you so much, Dr. Stanley. And
Hey,
we're going to move on to, oh, go ahead. Do you want to add something, Doug?
Yeah, Dr. Stanley brought up a good point on the stress and anxiety, and very quickly, that's part of the legal problem as well that some employers may lose sight of. Stress and anxiety are disabilities, can be disabilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act. They can also be serious health conditions under the FMLA. So you've got a lot of booby traps here. So again, that's an excellent point. You have to keep that in mind as well when you're thinking about possible accommodations.
Got it. Great, thank you, Doug. Okay. So kind of the nice flow is going into now, well, you've decided that you do want to open your doors, whether it be to a subset of your population or majority, or maybe even a minimal amount, but what types of physical modifications, cleaning procedures, best practices, we've heard about temperature checks, what are those things that employers should be considering? And we actually received a question before the presentation began where an employer mentioned that they were concerned they're going to be assigning cleaning tasks to employees, so they want to be able to protect themselves and do that in the right way. So I think here we'll start with you, Dr. Stanley, from a medical perspective. What preparations should employers consider in keeping their employees healthy and safe when there is a return to the workplace?
I think as we're returning to work, I like to keep it really simple. So I approach this very much like we all learned in kindergarten. Don't touch your face. Keep your hands and your fingers out of your ears, your nose, and your mouth. So very basic kindergarten 101. Next rule, don't touch your neighbors, right? Don't touch the kid sitting next to you. That's social distancing. And if we extrapolate that social distancing, that's part of why we stagger workplaces. If we have 200 people coming through the front door in 15 minutes, that's creating a cattle chute or a funnel effect. So we want to allow workplace rules and regulations to offset when people are starting and when people are finishing, so that we can minimize volume through choke points like front doors, back doors, break rooms. So we're staggering those shifts appropriately. We also want to think about basic hygiene. Okay, cover your mouth, wear a mask, create one directional traffic patterns around the office so that you're not crossing each other face to face. The same reason the US interstate system is a divided highway. We want everybody going 75 miles an hour going in one direction. I'd rather have somebody cough on my back than in front of me. Okay, so it's little things like that, but it all rolls into this concept of really creating a culture where as a company, we're all going to do the little things together. So whether you're the CEO or the new hire, we're all responsible for cleaning our workstation. We're all responsible for following the rules going in and out of a bathroom. We're all responsible for following One Direction. We're all responsible for the questionnaires, for the temperature checks, and creating that true culture of accountability where we know that I'm not doing this to protect myself. All of the things I'm doing will protect me, but they're really meant to be a culture of I'm going to protect everybody I work with. And if we have that culture of accountability, again, following those kindergarten rules, wear your mask, don't touch your neighbor, keep your hands out of your face, simple things, it really does create a culture where from the top down, we know we're protecting each other.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Stanley. And we'll kick it to you, Cora, from an HR perspective. Again, I know that you're in the process of building your transition plan and starting to implement it. So what are your thoughts from an HR leader's perspective?
Yep. Well, the first thing I would say is make sure that you have the buy-in, ownership, and accountability at the executive team level. If you have not had a conversation with your CEO, CFO, COO, whoever those C-suite people are, about the simple rules that Dr. Stanley just talked about, if they are not willing and are not going to buy in, this is an uphill battle, right? It's, yes, lots of people, and the more people you have, the more concerns there are, but you really need the leadership team on board and prepared to demonstrate every single day that they will follow a traffic pattern, that they will wear a mask, that they are going to be seen washing their hands and wiping and sanitizing surfaces. So that's kind of where we've started, right? We've started with our leadership team. We're going to do the best job we can do providing visual reminders, because like kindergarten, right? Everyone needs a bit of a helping hand and a bit of a push when they're coming into an environment that they're very comfortable in differently. If we just open the doors and welcome people back, they're going to go right to the coffee machine and chit chat. When we open the doors and welcome people back, we want them to see social distancing reminders on the floors. We want the signage about how long to wash your hands with soap and water. We want the sanitizing wipes sitting out on the hard surfaces where we expect you to grab one and clean up. And we want there's enough supplies for everyone. It doesn't do any good to tell people that they're responsible for cleaning and sanitizing their workstations if when they go to do that, there's nothing there for them. So there's a lot to do in terms of the coordination of the physical space, the supplies required for the physical space, and then preparing human beings who are very comfortable in this environment, have done things one way for a long time, to come back and think about doing things differently. And I think that idea of culture and community, how do I participate in this new community where I'm responsible for the health and safety of my coworkers, is critically important. And getting at that and helping to reinforce that is really the crux of what we're trying to do, rather than here's a whole bunch of rules and regulations for you, welcome back, get to work, and please be productive. That's probably not going to make for a real happy work environment.
Sure. Yeah, I think empathy for others is going to be the key here, and it may end up helping with everyone's culture at the end of the day, right? It's about your coworkers, it's about your colleagues, not necessarily just about you.
Right.
So thank you very much, Cora. And Doug, very interested from a legal perspective. I know I personally have gotten a lot of questions from employers who are concerned that now they're taking on a new type of role, right? They might be testing people, they might be doing temperature checks, they might be asking questions that are otherwise sensitive, of course, right? So what do you think in terms of employers that are implementing these things? What do they need to do to protect themselves? I know we talked specifically in our preparations about HIPAA and files and policies. So if you could expand on that, that would be great.
Sure, absolutely. Sure. So a lot of employers are now faced with, we're here to create widgets. We're here in, construction. We're here to provide legal services. And now I'm taking someone's temperature as they come in the door. So a few things here. We get the question, can you take temperatures? Can you actually test people for COVID-19 as the employer? The answers to both questions in this environment are actually yes, you can. The EEOC has come out with guidance, which they had before with the H1N1, I believe. Because COVID-19 can be a direct threat, or is a direct threat to the safety of yourself and others, that gives you an exception where you can go ahead and take someone's temperature and actually test them for COVID-19 as the employer. Now, if you're going to do that, this goes back to where I started. This is really where you need to do this with policies and procedures in place. You need to have a written plan. Who's going to take the test? When is it going to occur? Are you testing everybody or just guests who are coming into the building? I can see the temperature checks that's being done. I'm seeing and learning often. I'm not sure that we're advising employers to go ahead and take COVID-19 tests, and Dr. Stanley could talk more on this than I just don't know how useful it's going to be on Monday unless you're getting an instantaneous result, which I don't think you're going to get. You know, the person comes in on Monday, hangs out for 3 days, and then on Wednesday or Thursday you get the results. I'm not sure how good that's going to be. You're going to have to protect the person. If an employee is taking the temperature, you know, make sure they're protected. They're going to need personal protective equipment. Again, there's CDC guidelines and all of this. You have to have policies and procedures is kind of the big takeaway here when you're doing this. And then yes, to your other point about confidentiality, if someone has a high temperature, you don't send a mass-wide, company-wide email. Jane Smith came in today with 101, she's going home. Hope everybody has a good day. You don't want to do that. You know, there's confidentiality issues, not just under a HIPAA, but maybe even more importantly, more relevant under the Americans with Disabilities Act, because when you're taking a temperature, it really is a medical test. The other big takeaway here, a lot of employers don't do this. Make sure you put any results or records regarding this testing in a separate medical file. I can't tell you how many times I get a personnel file and I see all the medical information in there. That has to be two separate documents. That's my pet peeve for the day, but make sure you do that as well. But again, make sure you have policies and procedures in place before you embark on this adventure.
Great.
Ryan,
And Dr. Stanley, do you have, oh, go ahead, Corey. Sorry.
to say one thing on temperature checks that I would just caution people around. We were compelled to do them in one of our municipalities because the municipality passed an ordinance saying, employers, if you have essential workers that are coming in, you must temperature check them daily. So we got to work creating a protocol. We worked with our legal team to make sure that we didn't do anything crazy. And shortly thereafter, we had another area of the country where our distribution center was having frequent kind of scares, right? People that were concerned that they may have been exposed because they had a family member or friend close to them exposed. They actually asked, can we please do the temperature checks? Everyone would feel much more comfortable. So we've been doing these in these two locations for about 4 to 5 weeks now. And what I can tell you is the paperwork process around this is extremely cumbersome because we do a daily temperature check and weekly those logs get logged from an HR perspective into independent medical files. Thank you very much, Doug. And the paperwork gets destroyed. So there's ownership at the local level with regard to managing that paper, locking it up, keeping it confidential until it's given to HR and destroyed. And then there's the whole people aspect. When we implemented this, everyone was really excited about it. They felt so much more safe and comfortable. Fast forward 5 weeks, people do nothing but moan and groan about the fact that they have to have their temperature taken every day because what difference does it really make is kind of what we're hearing. So what I would caution anyone thinking about doing this is think about what the world looks like 3, 4, 5 weeks from now. Think about all the unintended consequences. Think about the responsibility that you're taking on because it's not something, I mean, we're at a place right now where in the one location, we aren't allowed to stop because we need to do it for the municipality. In the other location, they're saying, can we just stop doing this? So now we're trying to answer a whole bunch of other questions about, well, what happens if we just stop because we feel like it? And in 2 weeks, we're dealing with a COVID case that someone says, my gosh, had we been taking temperatures, maybe we would have caught this, right? So there's a lot to think about, and I'm not suggesting that it's not the right thing. I think it can be the right thing for some companies, but it sort of is what it is, right? You're not necessarily super proactive in this case, but it does help from an accountability perspective.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. Dr. Stanley, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the thing we need to really understand is there is no silver bullet. There's no one thing or panacea that's going to fix everything. And there's an old surgical axiom that says the enemy of good is perfect. There is no perfect plan. What we need to do is be thoughtful and come up with a good plan that's going to work, but understand that everything that we do has limitations. Temperature testing is wonderful, but we know you can have a fever for 2 days after you've been spreading the virus. So it's a lagging indicator of being positive for COVID-19. doing the nose swab or the diagnostic PCR testing, that sounds like a really great idea, but it's a diagnostic test. It is not a screening test. It's a very poor screening test. And it's also expensive and has lots of other issues. The antibody testing that everyone's talking about, we really don't know how to use it, and we don't have a vaccination. So whatever we're doing is going to have some issues. The questionnaires and asking people these questions, we have to rely on people to be trustworthy. But what I think, if we really pull back and look at this from just a human nature standpoint, doing the temperature testing makes people feel like we're doing something. There's a need to react, there's a need to respond, and taking those temperature screenings, asking those questionnaires, making sure that you have to verify, I do not have a fever, I do not have upper respiratory symptoms, I've not been exposed, I'm not having myalgias and chills, I still can taste. Having somebody verify and ask that creates a Hawthorne effect of that accountability, where people feel that as they're being watched, they know they now have an option to say, hey, I think I've got a temperature, can I work from home? It gives them an out that should they have a symptom, should they have a fever, should there be a problem, they can reach out and say, I know I'm not going to pass the screen, I feel well enough to work, can I stay quarantined in my house? And it's giving people an additional level, and we talk about that culture of accountability, where they can be accountable without necessarily having to be caught at the door. Because nobody wants to be the person who's waiting in line and gets red flagged for having a temperature. If they know they're not feeling well, they can call and say, hey, I can work from home, is that okay? But there's no perfect plan. It's really just a perfect intention, and it's the application of that intention with the policies and the procedures and the legal advice, and doing it in a very thoughtful way. That's really the best method forward.
Great. Yeah, obviously this is a topic that's hitting home with many. Getting a lot of questions. Go ahead, Doug.
Just briefly, I wanted to mention, just to make things even harder for employers, I'm sure everyone wants to hear that. If you do have a confirmed case of COVID-19 in the workplace, and if there is evidence that it's work-related, then to add to the cumbersome process, you have to consider an OSHA 300 log as well. You might have to report that on an OSHA reporting form. So just make sure you have that into consideration as well.
Great. Thank you. Certainly a changed world for employers everywhere. So I think that's some valuable stuff, and we're getting some questions in, so we'll make sure to address them in the Q&A. And thank you for everyone that has provided questions thus far. So a fourth question we have is, so now as we're talking about safety protocols and policies, what's the best way to communicate and train employees? Each of you have touched on this to a point, but we obviously know we want the employees and we need them really to be an active part of the solution to keep everybody safe. So Corey, in our preparation, you had some great thoughts on this from an HR and just an overall company leader perspective. So love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yep. As I stated before, we'll start with our people leaders, right? Here's what's expected of you. Here's how you can help us get your physical location ready. And here's what we expect you to do in terms of monitoring, right? I had a regional manager say the other day, I do not want to be the COVID-19 police. That's not what I'm here to do. And I laughed a little bit because our distribution center have been living through this. They never went home. They've been there doing the thing. And guess what? Sometimes they are the COVID-19 police. They do absolutely have to go up to their employees and say, hey, that doesn't look like 6 feet. Can you guys separate out a little bit? Hey, if you help and make sure your masks are on. How are we making sure that, you know, we're keeping people safe? And so to an extent, people leaders need some encouragement and also a very specific and clear message that we expect you to help enforce these policies and these expectations with our employees. If you're not willing to help out with reminders and being clear about those expectations, that's going to be a problem for bringing people back to work. The other thing that I think we're excited about, and this was not my idea, we got it from someone else, create a return to work video. Just like you onboard new hires and you provide them with the context of the history of your company, why you're such a great employer, the benefits that are available to them, we're going to basically reintroduce our workforce to, hey, welcome back. Things are a little different, and here's what we want you to know, right? Look for the physical and the visual cues. There's going to be tape on the floor. There will be signs. Your workstation may look a little bit different because we may have moved you from this cube where you have 3 neighbors surrounding you to this cube over here where no one is surrounding you. So we want them to be prepared. We also want to be really clear in terms of this idea of community and how do I participate as a good citizen. Have an acknowledgement with regard to, if I am here to return to the office, I'm here to participate in this community as a good citizen, right? Not a waiver, because we heard Doug very loudly and clearly the first time we talked about this. And, you know, a waiver also, just forget all the work, it makes you sound like a jerk, right? So you've allowed me to work from home, now I'm gonna come back, and because maybe you didn't do a good enough job, you want me to tell you that I won't cause trouble? It's not a real nice thing in terms of just the way it feels for employees. So ours is really an acknowledgement that more says, I get it, things are a little bit different, and I'm gonna do my part, right? We'll have some policy changes. I mean, quite frankly, as Dr. Stanley was talking about temperature checks and accountability and how do I feel, we've got 135 employees who, when they are sick, they cannot work from home. And to think about over the course of the next 3 months or so, those employees being comfortable calling up and saying, I really don't feel well, I don't think it's a good idea for me to come in, there's a financial impact to them if they do that. They're either going to be using up PTO time or they're going to be taking time without pay. And neither one of those options is really great for that population of 135 people. So we're going to have some policy changes, and that means understand what those policy changes are and acknowledge that they've been given notification that the policy has changed. The good news is, in most cases, it's changing to their benefit. But it certainly is like any other policy change you do, you want to provide notice, you want people to have time to absorb that change, know when it's happening, make sure they understand it. So all that will be included in this return to work. And I would imagine our first few days on site are going to feel a lot like hall monitors and COVID-19 police, and we'll get through that. I mean, the distribution centers did it just fine. They've got a lot of really great examples. So I'm encouraged by that, and I think it helps our regional managers think a little bit more about what type of accountability they're going to be prepared to uphold as they return to work and get their folks back into the office.
Sure. Yeah, and Dr. Stanley, we'll kick it to you here. And I know, you know, you touched on this a little bit before. It's kind of getting back to being kids, right? So what do you think in terms of communications and training employees to make sure they're part of the solution?
Yeah, you know, again, there's no perfect way to do it, but I think as close as you can get to perfect is communicate early and communicate often. You know, it's really about creating that, as Cora said, a corporate citizenship in which it's my responsibility to protect you, and I expect you to protect me. And if everyone is protecting everyone else, that's really that culture that we want to elevate. But part of the communication we have to discuss is we're asking people to do things that they've never done. You know, it takes medical students and nursing students and healthcare professionals months to get used to wearing a mask without touching their face. And I'm sure that we've all gone to the grocery store and wear a mask, and everybody's touching their face and their mask because it's not a natural thing. And we're asking people to do that. Putting on gloves, super easy to put on gloves. And if we're painting with gloves on and we get some paint on our hands, not a big deal. But if we're talking about a potentially infectious disease, we need to be thoughtful about teaching people how to take off those gloves. Or if we have somebody on our team that's putting on full personal protective equipment to protect themselves as they're taking temperature screenings and they're scanning people at a door, we need to make sure that that person is educated on the proper way to wear that PPE, but more importantly, the proper way to take it off so they're not contaminating themselves. You know, so there's a lot of little things. Cora talked about signs for hand washing. We all wash our hands. How many of us honestly do it for 20 seconds? I work in healthcare, and I can tell you the statistics when we study healthcare providers, it's not 20 seconds. You know, so, you know, as a general population, we have to communicate early, we have to communicate often, and it's got to be, again, back to that kindergarten level, keep it simple. If we can do the basics really, really well, then the more complicated stuff gets a lot easier. But it's setting that fundamental foundation of we're going to do the basics exceedingly well.
Great. Yeah, I know some employers are even posting songs for the employees to sing that are 20 seconds. So it works with my kids with brushing their teeth. So hopefully it'll work for employees. So Doug, we'll kick it to you. What are your thoughts on this piece in terms of communications and training employees that can become an active part of the solution here?
It's kind of along the same lines that Cora went through and Dr. Stanley. The biggest takeaway here, again, Cora mentioned on it as well, is go through the training, go through the communications. The labor lawyer in me will say, document that you've done that. Actually have a sign-off form, an acknowledgement form that says you've done all this. Again, this is some degree of self-protection. You don't want employees coming down later and saying, well, no one told me that. I wasn't made aware of how to do this, how to put the gloves on and how to take them off. And then stick that in their personnel file as well, so you have that there on top of that. And then again, review, and I apologize for keep harping on this, but it's very critical, especially if God forbid you get to litigation. You want to look at your existing policies that you have in place now, and then look to see if you do need some of those more policies. Again, I just jotted a few down. I mean, do you have a social distancing policy? Is it actually written down? Have that down. Do you have a policy on masks? Do you have a policy on testing? On staggered hours, on the hand washing that was just discussed. You want to make sure you have as much clear communication as possible. OSHA, again, has a good website and guideline on infectious disease policy, a preparation plan. Again, this is all new things for employers because this is not what we're accustomed to doing. But you want to make sure you have as much communication that is written so it's clear and there's no misunderstanding. That's all well documented. That's your first line of defense in this area.
Okay, great, thank you. Any last minute thoughts from anyone on this topic? Very comprehensive, okay, great. Thank you. So now going on to our last question here. So regarding employees specifically working remotely, so many have found positives. So increased workforces being remote, and it seems to work for some organizations, and a lot of times it's almost been better for some employees and organizations. So in terms of the new normal, or at least how things have changed, what are some things that you are seeing as positives and things that you can take from a positive light as we move forward? So Cora, I'd love to start with you here.
Well, Ryan, I think the big thing for us is that flexible workplace, right? We proved to ourselves in a really uncertain, chaotic blizzard, right? I think that's what Dr. Stanley called it, that we could do this. And we did it without much preparation at all. We did it without a policy, without, right? I think our IT team is probably freaking out a little bit because we were talking the other day and Gary said, gosh, by the time we knew what people were doing, it was too late to track all the equipment, because we literally said to people, if you need an extra screen, just take it off your desk and bring it home, right? We trust you to bring it back. So if there's any sort of flaw in what happened, we probably don't have all of our IT equipment tracked appropriately. However, we proved to ourselves and to our leadership team and to our customers that it doesn't matter where the OmniCable employee is answering your call from, we still do it in 24 hours and you still get exactly what you wanted, right? So that was a big, we've been celebrating that like crazy, which is really great. It sets the stage then for a more formal work from home policy, a better flexible work environment. And those are things that I think everyone is celebrating. The opportunity we have, quite frankly, is because we're so accustomed to being in the office, everything gets done face to face. So when I see that you've just landed a huge order, or when the distribution far above and beyond to make sure that something goes out the door on time, we just get people together and celebrate and high five and get pizzas and do all that. And that's great, it's awesome, but it's not realistic anymore, right? First of all, Dr. Stanley's gonna say, please don't encourage high fiving. That would be terrible, right? Not if we're creating a social distance policy.
Don't touch.
Yeah, no touching.
No touching, don't touch your neighbor, even if it's to be nice to them.
Yeah.
So part of our challenge, quite frankly, is this whole idea around recognition, rewards, acknowledgement. And you would think for a company that has, multiple locations across the country, we might already have some great system. We don't. We've been very localized in this. And it's a real opportunity from a leadership perspective to recognize that Our regional managers and distribution center managers do a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to recognition and rewarding. They take it on their own. They do some really cool things for their teams, but they're doing all that without any sort of guidance, without any idea generation. They're just doing it. I'm proud of them, and I'm glad they've done that. I think if we were to compile and really think about this holistically as an organization, how do we best reward and recognize all these great things our people do? We would find that there's a lot of opportunity to drive some consistency and to make sure that we do more celebrating than we've ever done before. The reality in that, though, is we need a way to do that without the gathering for pizzas, those types of things. So we're going to have to get a bit more creative, but I don't see that as a negative. Sure, it's a task and some more work to do, but it's a really positive reason to go invest some time. And we're looking forward to that, quite frankly.
Great. No, those are great insights, and we've certainly seen that too. I know Dan was actually doing an interview for an HR leader, and they were talking about some of the tools and resources that they're looking at and implementing for being able to do some of those things remotely. Because to your point, it's not something you necessarily always had to do before, or didn't have to do as much as you're going to have to do in the future. So those are great points. Thank you very much, Cora. And then Doug, we'll kick it to you for this question. What are your thoughts?
Sure. So here's the maybe conundrum for employers. Working remotely, from my experience of what I've seen, has actually worked out very well. Some employers really like it. I have one client that told me, we're not going back. We're just going to do this remotely because it's saving costs and expenses. We haven't lost efficiencies in doing it. You know, we'll still have some people come in the office as needed, but so far the setup has worked. Do you remember all those cases when employers were saying you can't work remotely because there's a central function of your job to be in the workplace? How dare you ask to work remotely? You can't do that. It's an undue burden on the employer. Well, us jaded labor defense attorneys are going to have a harder time making those arguments now. You know, after we go, what are we, 2, 3, 10 years into this? I can't keep track anymore. Yeah. It's harder to say, you know, we can't have her or him work remotely. It's just not practical. So that's where you do have to be a little wary. So if you are that employer where you really do need people in the workplace, I mean, there are team environments. Sometimes you do need some constant interaction. You might want to consider putting a policy together about talking about, hey, this is an exception to the rule. I mean, that's something you can consider doing if you're really that strongly about that. I'm trying to look ahead, you know, 1-2 years, hopefully sooner, when this subsides, and we're in a different situation, and then, you know, everyone's in the workplace, and then we're back to the same arguments about working remotely or not. But just keep that in mind when you're going forward. You know, employers should make a decision about what works best for them, and communicate that again. I mean, that's a running theme of this webinar is communications. It is very important because in HR and labor law, you don't want surprises. Nothing good comes of them. So you want to try to make sure you communicate what your policy is, and then follow it as well.
Great. Thank you, Doug. And Dr. Stanley, last but not least, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this situation and kind of the positive lights or the changes we'll see going forward.
Yeah, I think from a purely medical standpoint, we've been talking about virtual healthcare for the better part of a decade. Mm-hmm. And it's always been sort of a Star Trek, Star Wars, futuristic, yeah, but we're not ready, is the technology. And really fundamentally, I don't think that the healthcare providers were ready to do it. And I don't think that the public was ready to engage in that vehicle. And then almost overnight, we said, hey, it's virtual first. You know, don't come to the clinic. That's where the bugs go. Don't go to a hospital. That's where sick people live. And nothing changed. Sick people have always been at health centers. They've always been at hospitals. It's just one day we woke up and we were scared of it and we were aware of it. So the advancements in virtual healthcare have been exponential. I mean, I would say we're 10, 20 years farther down the road talking about virtual healthcare, virtual mental health, virtual consultations than I dreamed we would have been a year ago. So the medical advancements and the ability to extend a clinic beyond its 4 walls. I've been trying to discover a way that we can create a clinic without walls, a true virtual clinic, and everyone looks at it like that's not a real thing. And now we're all talking about, wow, that'd be really nice to be able to offer the same benefit to my employees all over the entire country. So that virtual expansion into healthcare has been great. As the chief medical officer of our employer and consumer division, Where I think there's a lot of novelty and sort of the world is finally wide open is we're all aware now that healthcare is different, it's changing, it's expensive, and we're all scared of what our premiums are going to look like in the fall. So I'm seeing healthcare providers, I'm seeing employers, and I'm seeing groups like yours, Ryan, that are all coming to the table saying we need to reimagine what the future looks like. What are some of the different levers that we can pull to look at our employed workforce in one location or in national or international locations? What are the levers that we can pull medically to really create that triple aim of improving clinical outcomes at a lower price point that's just a better experience for our employees? So there's a confluence of thought leadership that's all saying, hey guys, it's time to change. And before, usually one of those three parties was a little bit recalcitrant. And now everyone's saying, hey, let's make tomorrow better. We have an opportunity. People are open to being open.
Great. Thank you very much. Is there any final thoughts on that question before we move on to our Q&A part of the presentation? Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, and thank you to those who sent in some questions. There's still time to do so. What we're going to do is take about 15 minutes here to ask some questions, have some answers, and I do have a few in front of me that I'm going to touch on. And the first one's easy. It was, can we obtain a copy of the presentation and the audio? And absolutely, we'll be sharing the recording and any slides or anything else that comes along with it following the presentation to all of you attendees. So thank you. The next question specifically was to Doug, and I'd love to get your thoughts, but of course, Cora and Dr. Stanley, any thoughts you'd like to provide after Doug provides his, we'd be happy to hear them. So if an employer requires that an employee provide specific details about a family member or others that have been exposed, does the employee need to provide the specific information such as the person's names, dates, and those types of things where they were exposed? Is there legal ramifications to providing that kind of disclosure? What are your thoughts there, Doug?
Yeah, I'm not sure the employer needs names, dates, rank, birth date, stuff like that. I think it's a general questionnaire I've seen, kind of akin to the travel. Have you been traveling outside the country in the last 14 days? Have you been exposed to anyone who has COVID-19? I would err on limiting it to that. I don't think you need to get into more specifics about identity of the individual, because then potentially that individual, not necessarily employee, but that individual could have a potential, privacy claim is kind of how it would rear its head in that regard.
Okay.
Just ask what you actually need. Don't go beyond that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
One thing, Ryan, that we have struggled with because of all the things that Doug just said was employees who live at home with large extended family. So someone in the family has symptoms, and their symptoms are such that they've been advised to get a COVID test. So the employee comes to us and says, I may have been exposed, my mother COVID test today. And so it's not directly our employee, but we understand enough to know that there's risk there, right? We probably should send that person home. And then it's the whole process with regard to when does that person come back? And how do we know for sure, right? Because we have some folks who are a little skeptical that this is really happening. What if they just don't want to be at work and they're trying to get away with something, right? That's always sort of people go to that spot. So this is where this whole idea of documentation and what can you ask someone for, and why do you need it? And so one of the things that we've started doing when we hear these things is ask, okay, really sorry to hear that. Clearly, since it's possible you've been exposed, you need to go home. And the way we cover your time until we've confirmed that this is truly a COVID-related case is through PTO or unpaid time. Once we confirm that it is a COVID case, then we use all of the things we have at our discretion under the FFCRA and the new policies we put in place and whatnot. And so just at least share a basic piece of confirmation from their relative. We ask them to take off the name, don't give us birth date, any of that. Just give us a snapshot of this was the documentation I got from my COVID test, or the doctor's note that says you're COVID negative, and so now your loved ones can return to work. But in a question that we've asked, is it okay? Make sure it is okay with the person whose documentation it is, their personal information that they share with us. And if not, If people are uncomfortable with that, we don't require it. And then we go on, and I say this to managers all the time, I understand that there's some trust issues here. We will always err on the side of protecting the privacy of our employees and their families versus making sure you feel 100% confident that this is a valid document from a valid doctor with valid information on it, right? So it's challenging, but I think helping the person understand why and what we're doing to help them helps people feel better about, okay, I'm comfortable sharing with you what I'm able, and us being very specific around, that's not something we put in an employee file. We don't even put it in a medical file, right? It's for an HR person to take a quick look at, to validate, yes, this is all COVID related. Let's apply the appropriate leave statuses. And then that's it, it's destroyed. We don't need to save those documentations.
Great, thank you. Anything else to add from any of the panelists on that? That's very insightful. Okay. We actually had another question that was kind of similar, and I think is a good follow-up to that. And then I'll actually kick it back to you, Cora, because I think you might have some great thoughts on this. So, you know, we talked about if somebody has been exposed to someone with COVID or maybe themselves and that type of documentation. But what about those employees who just come to you as an employer and say, hey, look, I live with someone who has a vulnerability, maybe it's diabetes or heart disease, and they're just saying, I'm very concerned about bringing it home. What are your thoughts there on how to handle that type of situation?
Yep. So it's fairly easy for us if you can do your job from home. We simply say, great, stay home, right? It's just easier. This alleviates all of their fear. We don't have a strong need for them to be in the office and everything's good. It is much more challenging for our distribution, and we've conversations. We have a distribution center employee with diabetes who immediately came to us and said, hey, I'm in a risk category, what should I do? Now, the conversation was easy for us because he really wanted to be at work. I really want to be here. We've taken extra safety precautions with him in particular. He's very diligent and good about managing things, so we've just worked that out. In cases where people have vulnerable loved ones that they are interacting with frequently, it's really a case-by-case basis. I like the idea of no silver bullet. We haven't found one yet. And in some cases, we've afforded some extra flexibility in terms of maybe you come into work a little bit later and you work a shorter shift. Maybe you're not coming into work and maybe you need a leave of absence, a personal leave of absence, right? It's not covered under the FFCRA because the person's not sick and you're not caring for them. It's just simple vulnerability. But we've really looked at doing a lot of listening, right? Is this really someone's fear because they don't know, they haven't made good use of the resources available to them, and maybe that's just simply what they need facts and information and some guidance? Great. If they feel better after that, that's wonderful. If they're still not happy or still concerned, right, then we're going to do what we can to provide. Not mean you just don't show up for work for the next 6 months and you still have your job and we also pay you, right? It's certainly not practical. But we found a way to kind of work with our employees through this in a way that works for them. And that's different for everyone.
Great, thank you. Any thoughts, Dr. Stanley or Doug, on this topic?
Yeah, I have a lot of consultations with people around the country, and we do some chief medical officer consulting specifically around this, of finding some unique, I'm going to say, workarounds or ways to advise to deal with this. In the health centers that I run around the country, we've actually asked our staff to show up to work in their street clothes, bring their scrubs in a bag, and change your clothes in an exam room. So put your scrubs on at work. At the end of the day, go back into the exam room, doff your clothes that you've been wearing in the office, put them back into the bag and tie that up. Put your street clothes back on. Then when you go home, immediately wash those clothes so that we're minimizing any potential contamination from my health center staff to their families. Conversely, we've had places similar to where Cora works where they may not have a place to change clothes, but we will say, to minimize risk of contamination to those loved ones you're caring for, when you come home, have a place where you take your shoes off in the garage or by the door where you know they're going to be safe, they're not going to get wet, they're not going to get rained on, but immediately come in, take your clothes off, put them into a basket where you know you're going to launder them, rinse off, clean off. So before you're interacting with anybody in your home, do some little things to protect the folks in your house, because if everyone in your workplace is doing the best they can, you're really minimizing that potential spread, And if we're taking it one step further of taking that extra precaution home, it really expands that culture of accountability and group care one step further.
Great. Thank you. And Doug, I know you've touched on this a couple of times, but any thoughts?
Yeah, just this is a unique question and a dangerous one because it raises unique legal issues that I just haven't seen the answer to yet. Hence, it's dangerous because you have to be concerned here. Under the ADA, there's something called associational discrimination. So in the question, if the employee has a family member who has diabetes, has a heart condition, or some other condition, and you just tell the employee, you know what, too bad, you got to be in here, or else we're going to let you go. They could bring that type of claim. I'm trying to help someone who has a disability or look out for that person. So you got to be wary of that risk. It raises a really interesting issue under the FMLA because the FMLA gives you time off to care for someone with a serious health condition. By the employee saying, they don't want to be exposed to a risky situation. Is that care under the FMLA? I don't know. That's a creative argument, maybe. Is it riskier to go to work or to ShopRite or to Target? I don't know. So I think Cora's points were good ones, but really you want to walk through this and try to find out the best solution for that specific situation. You're not going to have a cure-all for everything, but this is one where you do have to tread carefully.
Okay. Yeah, that's great feedback. Thank you very much. Another question we had, and we have just about 5 minutes left, and I'll kick this one to you, Dr. Stanley. We got a question about recommendations for cleaning and disinfecting protocols. So if you don't mind expanding on that with your expertise, that would be appreciated.
So there is no gold standard for what to clean with. I tell people just get a Clorox-based cleaner because it's easy. You can find it anywhere. If you've got a good vendor supplier that you can work with, they can get you things in bulk, but make sure that it's going to be bactericidal and virucidal. You don't want to use something that is just bactericidal and is not virucidal because we're dealing with a virus. But as we think about the application of those protocols, it's very much important that what I tell people, clean before, clean after. So when you get to your workstation, clean your workstation immediately. Take time to wipe everything down and do your work, continue to wear your mask, do all of your social distancing, follow all of those kindergarten practices we've talked about. And then at the end of your day, clean again. If you're in the break room and you touch a surface, wipe it down before, wipe it down after. It's that dual level so that you're making sure you're protecting yourself. And if somebody were to be in the area, and then you're cleaning up after, so you're protecting the next person. And it's that double layer of accountability where you're cleaning before and you're cleaning after. Cora we talked earlier on the call about making sure you protect people. If you've worked in healthcare for any period of time with the high alcohol percentage hand cleaners, it's extraordinarily rough on your hands. So Cora brought up they have gloves for people to wear to protect their hands from just the strength of these cleaners. But it's really, I always say clean before, clean after, or if you're in a workspace that may take a little bit more, make sure that you ensure the last half hour of that shift is dedicated to cleaning and create that corporate culture of we're going to stop, we're going to pause because I'm going to clean for the next shift. And they know that the shift before them took that half hour to clean before them. So it's that culture of what I'm doing matters to you, and I expect you to have me matter.
Great. Any thoughts on that, Cora? Maybe I'll kick it to you.
Sure. I think 100% what Dr. Stanley said. The reality for us is we've got this population of people who's been at work and they've established a cleaning protocol. They decided early on everyone will pitch in. So we've got a will call counter. Contractors and people from outside of our company will come and pick things up from us. And normally they come indoors, they hang in the counter area. Sometimes they grab a soda. They're allowed to use our restrooms, right? When all of this started, we very quickly closed our buildings off to anyone external, trying to, again, limit contact and exposure. And we created a will call situation where you remain in your car and an employee will come and bring whatever the supplies or equipment are out to you. So we sort of eliminated this need for a will call counter. However, the will call counter all the time. So they created a system whereby, depending on the day of the week and which cleaning session it was, right? If it's an 8-hour shift, we clean usually 3 or 4 times during that shift. Someone's responsibility is to wipe down the will call counter with the sanitizing wipe and throw. We know then that as we introduce our sales and our corporate teams back into these environments, they have habits too. They'll come out and hang out at the will call counter with everyone. We have to remind our folks that their customers are not coming in our building. So if you want to see your customer who's there for will call, guess what? You got to walk outside and go over and visit them from a safe and social distance in their car, because they're not coming into the building. Restricting the ability for people to walk through our warehouses, which there used to be walking paths, you could safely go through the warehouse. We've pretty much said there's no need for people to be in the warehouse, you're not going in. So one thing to keep in mind is it's probably not fair to pick 3 or 4 people who are responsible for cleaning up after everyone. Unless you have a facilities team whose job it is to clean up after people, I would not recommend designating people. I would get your departments together, get the leaders together, and figure out how, as a community, you're going to keep the community common spaces clean. What's the schedule? Post it on the wall. Everyone knows they have a turn. CE, HR people clean, right? Everyone cleans. And making sure that that's just part of what we do and how we've set the expectation, I think helps keep people feeling better about when it's my turn. I'm not just doing, something that stinks because no one else. I know that everyone else has taken their turn as well, and I'm accountable for my own space.
Great, thank you. And Doug, I have a feeling what you might say here, but any thoughts on it in terms of documentation specifically around cleaning and disinfecting?
I was taking notes as Dr. Stanley was speaking about clean before and clean after, really for my own household, not my employer. I mentioned I do have 2 kids in the house who are a little messy.
If you figure that out, let me know how that works, Doug.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll send them over to your house.
Perfect.
But signage is important, because I was just in our workplace the other day, the copy machine and the printers. What does the sign say? Clean before, clean after. So especially in copy machines, all those hands going on those things. So those are excellent points. So just put a sign up there reminding people to do that clean before and clean after.
Great. Good points. Well, I just had one more clarifying question that we'll take a moment to answer, and this one's actually to you, Doug. Somebody asked, they just wanted to clarify in regards to, sorry, just going back into the chat box here. They just wanted to verify in terms of the file. So if you're doing testing, they need to put that into a separate medical file, is it? So obviously different from their employee file, but is it almost a medical file that they should build for each employee?
I would, because I think under the ADA, if you're taking someone's temperature, my interpretation of that is you're getting medical information, you're getting their body temperature. Sure. That's a test. So I would err on side, take a few moments, get a manila folder, write confidential medical file. It's not a hard thing to do. And all the other medical documents that are already in the personal file, put those in there as well.
Great. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. So
to build on that, Doug.
Right, sure.
Yeah, when we're doing on-site testing with employers that are doing population health analysis, looking at how to aggregate the data for testing for their population, when we're collecting samples, we're actually having them sign a release of records in order to share that information with their employer, so that the employee knows, the employer knows, and that us as an agency that's collecting and doing that testing, all 3 parties understand what we're doing, where and why, and we let our client partners review that document so that everyone understands that we're really being very upfront about this data will be shared with your employer, and what's the purpose.
Yep, that's smart to do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. So we've reached the end of our Q&A time. But we do have some additional questions. So what we'll do is we'll reach back out to the panelists. You've all been so gracious to jump on with us today and spend your time. And I know I learned a lot. I mean, from the dry run that we did last week and today, I know I have a lot of good insights and feedbacks from my clients, and I'm sure that'd be echoed across the board. So we may be reaching out with you with some additional questions. So thank you for what you've done and continue to do for the community at large. So at this time, what we're going to do is we'll be turning our webcams off, and we'll be kicking it back to my colleague, Dan Foley, and he's going to talk about some resources that are available for you and some follow-up information. So thank you again to Cora, Dr. Stanley, and Doug for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you to Cora, Doug, and Dr. Stanley. That was really great. I know the whole audience, I'm sure, enjoyed it, and I think in particular, just each of your perspectives, you each have unique perspectives regarding this topic, so I thought it was really interesting to hear both of you. So thank you again. Return to work guide. We are very excited to share with the audience today something that we recently produced for our client base. It's a return to work guide. So hitting on a number of the different items and topics that were discussed today. So best practices, and this is a guide that employers can utilize as kind of a baseline as they're anticipating employees coming back to work and the planning of that activity. So return to work guide, we've shared with each of our clients. Everyone that is participating today, our guests, are also welcome to this. So you'll receive an online evaluation following today's program. If you would like a return to work guide, we're happy to provide that to you, no problem at all. Just indicate that in your evaluation, and we will be following up with you. So the return to work guide that we put together is just one piece of our COVID-19 employer resources and our COVID-19 employer resource page on our website. So today, thank you for participating in our webinar. You will find on our COVID-19 employer resource page each of the webinars that we've been doing throughout this last few months since the COVID-19 pandemic started, including legislative educational programs, as well as FAQs that employers have regarding, Cora mentioned the FFCRA, the CARES Act, and aspects of that were mentioned today. So we have frequently asked questions, as well as some guidance as it relates to, we didn't talk about retirement plans here today, but as mentioned in the beginning, we are retirement plan advisors and investment fiduciaries. So there were some changes and some flexibility that employers can deploy to their employees with regard to the retirement plan. We also are heavily involved with our clients improving the population health, kind of Dr. Stanley's area of expertise. So we are actively involved in helping clients improve the population health of their employee base. So our population health and wellness division has created quite a few resources that clients have enjoyed to help provide to their employees during this time to help them manage both their physical and mental well-being. We also have links to a number of external resources, some really cool video tips. And lastly, I wanted to mention, we, through an actuarial tool that we have, are able to provide employers a claims impact analysis as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we can get very granular with it and detail it for each particular employer. We've done that for each of our clients already, but those of you that are on the call that are not a client and would be interested in this, again, just let us know. No cost to do so. We're happy to turn that around for you fairly quickly with just some of your information. So that wraps up today's presentation. As Ryan mentioned, feel free to continue to enter questions, and we'll be following up with the audience with each of those answers. And if you have any additional questions, you can see, as mentioned, I comply after today's program. We have a email box specifically for compliance and COVID-19 related questions. So please send an email to icomply@idpllc.com. And be sure to follow us on social media. We actively update our social media pages, both LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. So if you're not following today, we welcome you to follow each of our social media pages. Thank you, everyone, again, for participating today. And I hope everyone has a nice weekend. Take care.